All right, so this is our close in some ways. So I want to just quickly, before we start actually diving into the Gemara, I want to review the Mishnah, review what we talked about last time in like a couple of words, and then I want to just outline where we're going today before we go there. So if that's okay. So first, let's just read the Mishnah. I'll read the Mishnah. Why not? We'll start with that if you guys don't mind my voice a little bit. You were on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph Bava Metzia, the Mishnah towards the top of the page. Ra'a otan ratzin achar Metzia, achar tzvi shavur, achar gozlot, shelo parchu, ve'amar zachtali sadi, zachtalo. Right. So an interesting question. I think it came up last time. I was driving when you said it, but whether or not achar Metzia colon, here are examples of Metzia, or there are three things here. But one way or another, there are things that are moving slowly that you see people running after in your fields, and you say, my field acquires for me, your field acquires for you. And however, hayat tzvi ratz kedarko, o shayu goslot mafrichin, ve'amar zachtali sadi lo amar klum. Right? If it's they're moving at full speed, these objects, obviously a metzia, it's just like a stationary thing, isn't moving at full speed, so it's not included in this list, or it's just the general example. Then your field cannot acquire it for you. And we talked a little bit last time about whether or not you actually have to say anything, right? There's some debate about that, which we're not going to dive into this time so much. But what's the big thing that got said last class, really at the beginning of the Gemara, that's really the important question that we're going to deal with today over and over again? This okimta on the Mishnah here. I call it okimta. I think it's an okimta. So somebody.
Where the person is when it's said.
Great. And where does the person have to be, at least at the moment that we're working with?
B'tzad Sedehu.
Exactly. Right. That's Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel. Right. Last time we dealt with the question of, wait a second, how does that compare to the statement of Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Hanina? But we said that's a Hatzer Hamishtameret is different, maybe. You don't need that. And then we had the whole question about Shicha. All right, with this, but which we're not going to get back into. All right. Good. And so now where are we going to go from here? We're going to have two statements supporting this, right? Ula and Rabbi Baruch Hana are both going to say, right, same thing, right? V'hushu omed b'tzad tzedehu. And then what challenges are we going to get in our exploration of this topic? I'll give you a hint. The first challenge is from a Mishnah. What's the challenge? You don't have to give it to me. Like,
that the challenge from Peah about discussing when I can declare something retroactively not Shicha?
No, that's what was last week, right? Now we're at the very bottom of the page. We have not from Peah, but also from Zraim.
We have Rabban Gamliel.
Yes, Rabban Gamliel. Good, great lead in. Thank you, Rav Lexi. It's and so I saw some other hands, maybe Noam or Sarah. Did you guys also?
I was gonna say the same thing.
Good, right? We have this Maasev Rabban Gamliel. What does Rabban, just very basically, what does Rabban Gamliel do that becomes such a challenge to us?
He makes a declaration about, he makes a declaration about something, a field acquiring for him when he's on a boat. So he is not by the side of his field.
Well, it's actually not him. He makes a declaration, but he
right.
Is makne things to people who are on the boat with him, right? Right. And they do not happen to be besides Sadeu, right? So how are they acquiring, right? In this case, it's, what is it, the case that he's makne to them, by the way?
It's Meiser, that is.
Yeah, exactly, right? Maser Rishon and Maser Sheni, right? Those are the two things. Okay, good. And we end up with, I think, essentially two solutions to that. One is Rava, essentially Rava, and is it Rava? This is but no, it's not Rava, sorry. Because Rava says you didn't have a Sudar. One is Rav Papa, and the other is vaguely, I'm not sure at the moment. But what's solution number one? Let's put it, irrelevant of who said it at the moment. It has to do with the, let's put it this way.
Joel, can you clarify the kasha?
Yes, good.
Can you clarify the kasha before you again? Because We only said that you needed to be next to your field in order for you to acquire something.
Yes.
This is not that case.
Well, good. That's actually going to be kind of the problem is, but initially, lichora, I'd say that what we're saying is it's the assumption about this Mishnah is they're acquiring their field is what becomes their field essentially is right because it's rented to them is acquiring for them even though they're not on the side of the field, right? So right now we're assuming that what the
That's
acquisition
the key point, that it's rented to them.
exactly yes. So, but
And
so that,
they're doing that as a means of transferring other property.
exactly.
Presumably because the other property is somewhere else, and so all the other ways of doing it don't really work.
Yeah.
And that's where we get do they have a sudar or not, whatever. I think that's one side.
And by the way, when we read this, I always think of chametz on Pesach, some people, whether you have to sell the place that the chametz is on.
Did you see the daf al hadaf that I sent out last minute? I did it last minute. It was
I didn't look at what
he gets into this question is a major question here about how do we sell to a non-Jew in particular because a non-Jew might not be able to do shlichut, isn't able to do shlichut, and so the chatzer is not an extension of shlichut, and therefore they would have to be next to potentially the field. It's a problem. So there's some solutions, but no, it's a great question. Okay, good. So there's two solutions, I think, to this problem that are given by the Gemara. The second is Rav Papa. What's the first one?
The first is that it's not a Kenyan Khatser, right?
Good.
That initially our assumption, or at least the assumption of Rabbi Abba is that what's happening here is that these areas are being rented to this Kenim, and then through it being their place, they are now acquiring the tithes that are on that place. And so the first answer is no, actually what's happening is that we have this idea that came up earlier that nechasim she'en lahem achrayut metaltalin, they can't be acquired by themselves through things like money or shtar or stuff like that. But land can. And if you acquire land through one of those mechanisms, you can toss some metaltalin into that sale, right? That you can wrap it up. And again, it's not irregardless, regardless of where the metaltalin are located, right?
Yeah.
That it's not about the metaltalin being on the land. It's about them being looped into this sale and this acquisition. And therefore, this isn't a kinyan hakatza. This is a totally different form of acquisition. So it doesn't matter that they weren't standing there.
Exactly. It's a kinyan agav, right? And kinyan agav, even though despite, it's like by way of my acquiring the field, other stuff can come with it. That doesn't even have to be on the field, right? It can be anywhere, right? This is a typical method actually of purchasing metaltalin through money or so forth is you throw in a field with it and you can get all the other stuff, right? This is it doesn't be a lav dafka field, a property with it, real estate. Okay, good. There's some complications with that we'll get into, right? Questions about whether or not you can do a kinyan agav with tavat hana'ah and so forth, but we'll get into that when we get to the Gemara. What's Rav Papa's solution, though, which is a different solution, and I think the one I really want to focus on today as we get there. What's the difference between the case of Rabban Gamliel and the case of the Mishnah?
That there's a da'at acheret?
Exactly, right. We've seen this show up a little bit already in our sugyot, right? That a Metzia has something very different about it in that there's not an initial owner who directly transfers it to the other person, right? That's going to be important, right? That a matana is different. So, and that may have different rules in terms of how it works. In other words, for instance, what might not be the case for when there's a matana or data. If I take, sorry, go for it before I finish.
You might not. Maybe this is jumping too far. That you want to go. Wait, maybe this condition of tzadeh who doesn't apply.
Exactly right. Maybe tzadeh doesn't apply to matana. So we're going to deal with, at the very end here, halachic questions of like, how far does that go? Does that mean a tzvi shavur that's running your field, even if you're not by it, the field can acquire for you as a matana, but a tzvi that shiratz kedarko will be an interesting question, right? That's where I kind of want to end up with all of this. Okay, finally, our Gemara has one final kind of question that deals with all of this, which is, dealing with this kind of question itself about matanot, which is, well, maybe about matanot, which is what? This is on Yud Bet Amud Aleph. People remember. It's not a question where I put something in your field, I do something else. As a hint, let's see, do I have a wallet on me?
You
I don't
throw,
know.
so is this the one where, like, does the airspace acquire if you're throwing a purse through?
Exactly.
Like, is it considered munach if it just passes through the airspace, if it wouldn't have stopped there? Which, don't we see that by Shabbat as well? Like, if it lands on a pedestal, it's a karma in the middle of your whatever.
Yes, wonderful. It's a big question on Hilchot Shabbat as well, about whether or not in the first chapter, at least I know from the first chapter, right, whether or not the airspace is considered to be, part of that domain if it flies through the airspace, and therefore have you done Hotza'ah on Shabbat in those cases. But also applies here as has it done, kinyan or not by flying through the airspace, even though it's not going to be munach. Although we'll see, like there's different interesting questions about what's going on here. Is it a case where it gets intercepted? Is it a case where it would not have been munach at all in that area, and so forth? So, okay, good. That's general outline. Any thoughts, questions, anything we said completely wrong or missed or something like that? Noam, please.
Yeah, could I ask a question? So, is the difference between a kinyan chatzer and a kinyan agav? Just, am I understanding this correctly? A kinyan agav, you own the chatzer or whatever land in the first place, and that enables you to acquire a new thing. Sorry.
Opposite way.
I actually didn't
Opposite
get it.
way. Yes.
Okay, but that is the right distinction. Whereas a
Yes.
kinyan agav, anyway, yes.
Exactly, right? A kinyan chatzer, you can do a kinyan chatzer as you purchase the chatzer. Other stuff comes with it as a kinyan chatzer. But in a kinyan, if I already own the chatzer, you can throw stuff in there, and I can acquire it through my chatzer, right? And then we get the questions of, mishtamer lo mishtamer. Kinyan agav is like by way of my purchasing the chatzer, other stuff that you own can come with it, right?
Right.
That's
Right.
kinyan chatzer.
One is simultaneous and one is sequential.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
If first you buy the chatzer, and then the chatzer can acquire for you.
Mhm.
Or versus simultaneously with the chatzer, you got other things.
Yeah, there are cases. Oh, sorry, go Rav, Lexi, please.
No, and just also part of the relevance is like, as mentioned, that in a kinyan chatzer, because it is the chatzer that is acquired, like again, is sequential, is acquiring for you, it's also through something being in the chatzer, right? It's the space itself is acquiring for you. You have to be there. Whereas like I can sell you my land and also throw in my lawnmower that's like in a garage elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Just to say that again, it doesn't actually have to be on the land itself in a kinyan agav. It does have to be on the chatzer itself in a kinyan chatzer. So I can't just take an object, throw it somewhere random, and say, hey, because you happen to own a chatzer somewhere, that you have now acquired this kind of thing. So, oh, that would be really cool. But as a very deeper question that I don't have any good answers to, but I think is very important, is why these were the ways that kinyanim are these like based on psukim? Is it based on some sort of tradition? Is it based on Roman law? I don't know the answer to any of these questions. It's an interesting investigation, but as we know and we saw earlier, right? Kinyan for metaltalin, if it's not kinyan agav or kinyan chatzer, you have to do things like meshicha, right? Which is actually a pain, real pain. In fact, that should be the problem, right? If with chametz, right? If you were trying to sell your chametz and doing some sort of kinyan agav or something like that doesn't work, or kinyan chatzer, then there's a whole question, like maybe the non-Jew has to do meshicha on every, on the items themselves. Maybe they can do chalifim, right? Which is a whole nother question, but
I mean, not that I've done research and not that I have an answer for your question, but I just will say one thing, that it's intuitive that both of these methods should work, because, if I buy a car, and then a used car, let's say, and then the guy says, oh, the seat covers I didn't sell you. The assumption is that there's a kinyan agav, that when you buy something, you get the things that go with it. And also a chatzer also makes sense that when Amazon delivers something into my house, then it's mine now,
exactly. So, yeah, and we see this play out. These are important, questions in our world as well. So with that, let's dive into the Gemara. itself. So we are on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. I want to start with V'chein Amar Ula, which is what, 5 lines from the bottom, I think. Is that yeah. And we're Ula here is commenting on that original statement of Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel V'hu Shomed B'tzad Tzadehu, right? It's well, he's going to say it again, so we'll go with that. Someone want to read? No, please.
וכן אמר אולה והוא שעומד בצד שדהו, וכן אמר רבא בר חנה והוא שעומד בצד שדהו.
Good.
So they're both saying that you would need to be standing by the side in order to make the kinyan.
Great. Nothing so novel there, except now we're going to have the trouble. So
ATV Rabbi Abba le'ula מעשה ברבן גמליאל וזקנים שהיו באים בספינה. אמר רבן גמליאל, איסור שאני עתיד למוד נתון ליהושע. And 1 second, it's just going to take me a moment to change the page. מקומו מוזכר לו. ואיסור אחר שאני עתיד למוד נתון לעקיבא בן יוסף, כדי שיזכה בו לעניים ומקומו מוזכר לו. So the story seems to be that Rabban Gamliel was on a ship and just remembered all of a sudden that he forgot to take Masrot. And he gave 1 Maser to Yoshua that Rashi tells us is Rabbi Yoshua bar Hanania, who was on the ship with him. And the place of that Maser was rented to Rabbi Yoshua bar Hanania.
exactly.
And then he gives the other one to sorry, it's taking me a moment to toggle between the pages, but to Akiva ben Yosef, and say the space is also rented.
Great. It's well, but just to make sure we clarify this, why Akiva bar Yosef or ben Yosef?
Because he's a Gabbai, so he's going to distribute the Maser Ani to all the Ani.
Great. Must be the year of Maser Ani, right? That's years 3 and 6 in the Shemitah cycle are Maser Ani years. And he needs to give that to him. Okay. Interesting questions. If you guys saw that Tosfot, I didn't assign it, right? Why, well, actually, it's maybe a good concept to know, right? In terms of, like why he has to give it to particular people, right? To make your Maser permissible, what do you have to do? If I have a pile, let me put it this way. I have a pile of grain or fruit or whatever it may be. Nice pile, right? Ready there. I want people to eat freely from it for my house, right? What do I have to do? Do I have to give it to a Levi, the Maser?
You got to scoop it and set it aside.
Exactly. You just have to separate it, right? There are a couple times a year when you actually do either have to say, I actually got rid of, right? Biarti et kol ha-kodesh min habayit, right? I believe is the pasuk. Did I get that right? And therefore, there are times when it has to be gone. So it has to be given away or burnt. So Rav Lexi, it looks like you had something you were.
That's part of why, I mean, there's the different debates as to why this is so urgent for Rashbag, right? Like the one take that I think Rashi gives elsewhere is basically that he's worried that his family is gonna eat from it because they assume that he already tithed it, but actually he has this big untithed pile of produce sitting around.
I think that was, by the way,
that
Tosfot, the last Tosfot on the page, was that not, or is that the
no, the
Rashi?
Tosfot mentioned that. That's them mentioning Rashi,
that's
and then
right.
they think that's incorrect. And the Tosfot think it's referring to Shata Bior, right? That's why it's urgent, is that it's like the time of Bior and he hasn't done it, and that's why it needs to be done like now.
Exactly. So, right, these are just good concepts that I want to throw out there of, how Maser works in terms of, by the way, another question, I just throw it out there. We won't necessarily answer it right now. If we have time, we will go back and look at the Tosfots. What's missing from this list?
what about Truma?
Yeah, what about Truma? This drove me nuts. The Tosfot deal with it. I don't know if you guys saw the Tosfot, right? But if you've ever like learned Masechet Demai, which is great to learn the Mishnayot of, I think, right? You know that actually not only is Truma very easy to take, but people are just taking it like all the time. It's a much easier thing. Tosfot answer this as well. It's Maser that's much harder, right? Because Truma you can essentially take anything and make it Truma. It's very simple, and Maser you actually have to measure out a certain amount. So it's exactly. That's okay. Good. This is a nice Maser from as a Mishnah from Maser. Maser Sheni, I believe, is the Mishnah from. But great. And Muskar Levichi Rabbi. All right. So now let's get into the actual meat of this. We saw the Mishnah. V'chi Rabbi Yoshua. So no, I'm doing a little bit more.
V'chi Rabbi Yoshua v'Rabbi Akiva b'tzad zadehu shel Rabban Gamliel hayu omdin? Right. So, but were they standing at the side of the field? So it's Akashia on Ula, and I guess Rabba Bar Chana.
Yeah. So really the entire way we've been interpreting the Mishnah so far, right? This is a problem. So, okay. So well, not an answer yet. I love this. This is keep going a little bit.
Actually, I liked it too. Amarle dame haim Rabbanan kedalo gamre inshe shamata. So Ula's like initial response is kind of more emotional than substantive. He's like, this Rebbe Abba is like this sage, namely Rebbe Abba, is like one who's never learned Torah before.
Exactly, right. This is if anyone's ever been in a shiur and you ask a question and someone's like, that's not a question, right? That's exactly what this is. Like that's the question that you ask when you don't know Torah, right? It doesn't give us an answer, right? As to why it's not a good question. It just it's not a good question. So, but yeah, exactly. So okay. But thankfully, the Gemara is going to give us a little bit more information here. So do a little bit more. You're doing great, Noam.
Ki ata lasura, amar lahu, hachi amar ula, vahachi utvine. So when Rabbi Abba arrived in Surah, he said to all of them there, Ula said thus and was refuted thus.
Yeah, I think it's actually ot vite. I refuted him. Such right. This is in fact. You read the Rashi, the Rashi under Kiata.
Kiata Rabbi Abba Lasura Amar Lahu. When Rabbi Abba got to Surah, he said to them.
He's like, so what's Rabbi Abba doing at this point, right?
He's bragging that he refuted Ula.
I think it's one step beyond that even, actually. I think he's like, Ula rejected him. He's like, I'm going to go to the better Beit Midrash over in Surah, and I'm going to show them, and they're going to say, oh yeah, you were really smart. That was clever.
Or I think that there's also a more generous read where he's just like, okay, Ula thinks this was a bad kasha, but refused to tell me why. He's just like, oh, you're so stupid. That's not even a good kasha. This is how I challenged him. Can you explain what the actual answer to that would be, since he refused to?
I like your read too. Like that's a good, maybe a much nicer read than mine, which is that he was, trying to go to the baby Josh that would help prove that his kasha was right. So, all right, we're going to take it a little bit more seriously here. Let's do a little bit more, Noam. You're going to keep you on this piece for a little bit. So,
Amar le hahumi mirabanan. Rabban Gamliel metaltale agav makarke hikna lahem. So, okay, so then there's someone in Surah who actually does give a teruth in support of Ula's position, which says that Rabban Gamliel did a kinyan agav, not a kinyan chatzer.
Exactly. All right, now let's read the Rashi here.
Metaltale agav. Okay, I'm using Hebrew books, which was like a bad choice for the day, but it's okay. Metaltale agav makarke hikna lahem. Velav mishum de tiknei lahem mekomam betorat chatzer. So right, so it's a kinyan agav. It's not a kinyan chatzer. Shefilu hikna lahem chatzer acheret she'enan betocha kanoi nami. Because even if Rabban Gamliel transferred to them some other property that the Masrot were not inside, it still would have been transferred. There still would have been an opinion of those Masrot. Kedutanan, because we get this in a Mishnah, Nechasim she'en lahen achrayut niknin im nechasim sheyesh lahem achrayut bekesev mishenatan hakesev bishvil hakarka. So right.
One more word.
Hakarka ve'ametaltalin.
Mhm.
Because it says in a sorry.
Good. No, that's good. Do that for the moment. So
Okay, because it says in a Mishnah that chattel is purchased with real estate, with money from the time that the money is handed over for both the real estate and the chattel.
exactly. This is a way of doing a kinyan for chattel. I love this. It sounds like the Sensino translation here. This is, I don't know if that's what they use, but this is good. For movable property, as we would say, metaltalin, right? You normally can't buy metaltalin bekesef, but you can buy it with money as long as you're also buying karka at the same time, and that's a kinyan agav. So, all right, good. And you can even do one more thing, right, which is going to be important here because they're not buying necessarily the maser. What are they actually doing? They're getting it as a
Matana.
matana. Yeah. So keep going with the Rashi.
Afilu karka b'mecher u'metaltalin b'matana niknin b'matana niknin hametaltalin b'kinyan hakarka below meshicha kedi yalfinan b'kiddushin.
Good. I'm not going to worry about the pasuk right now from Divrei. I mean, so it's
right. Okay. So yeah, or even the land in a sale or the chattel as a matana, the chattel is acquired with the acquisition of the land without any mashicha.
good. This is actually, I think, a huge thing, right? This is that we have two different types of sales going on. One is a monetary sale and one is a gift. And nonetheless, right, the movable property can still come with the karka, even though one's a matana and one is for a price. So it's or maybe even a throw in some ways, right? Like for the extra stuff. But right, there's a nice havamina to say, well, yeah, that makes sense if both of them are being bought for an amount, but not if one of them is free. That's that. So Rashi's clarifying there. Good. Okay. Anything on that answer so far? Sarah, please.
I just think it's like I see what it's trying to do, but I also think that tears just doesn't square nicely with the like lashon of what he's actually saying, right? Because he chooses to say like the place where those things are is rented to you.
Right. Yeah, it does
So
say.
why would he do that if he wasn't saying because you now have possession of dafka that place, that stuff is yours?
Yeah, you're right. He says mekomo.
It says Mikoma. I don't know. So I just like I understand the move, but I also think it's worth
That's a very interesting question, actually, because you're essentially asking, can kinyan agav work on something that's on the other side of the earth?
It can.
I mean,
Like,
that seems like Rashi is basically saying that. It
Right.
seems like it's kind of generally how it works, but that's not what. So if that's true, and we assume that he knows that, otherwise, why would he? I don't know. It seems like he would know that. Then, like, why does he say this thing where, like, this specific land is rented to you? He could have rented them something else.
Yeah.
Something presumably like if his whole purpose here is just to transfer the ownership of the maser, which seems
Could have
like
done kinyan suda. He could have Well,
kinyan suda, we're going to get that point.
He could have rented them some other insignificant, probably smaller piece of land, which seems like it might be easier. Like there are lots of things he could have done, but he didn't do that. So it seems like he rented them dafka the place where that stuff is because he intended for their ownership of that place to effectuate the Kenyan.
That's what Ula says.
Yeah, I just I don't know. I just think like the Lashon doesn't support this.
You're
No, I
right.
think you're, yeah. I think it's hard to say that this is just like automatically a Kinyan Agav. It seems a little bit weird. Like the initial challenge isn't a bad challenge. It does seem like it's a Kinyan Chatzer that he's doing. And so I think Rabbi Abba's challenge is good. And really, but we have to square Rabbi Abba's, we have to square Ula's statement with this Mishnah on Maser Sheni. And so the best way to do it is to, at least, well, I mean, not the best way. We'll see. Actually, this is the whole thing.
Yeah,
actually,
I mean, I
Rav
think
Papa
it's not the
works
best
so
way.
nicely. Yeah,
And that's
Rav Papa
why.
works so nicely this way in that he doesn't have to worry about what kind of kinyan it is, right? It's so he instead Rav Papa is going to make an okimta on so let's say an okimta on Ula's statement to some extent, right? It's like going to say Ula is right, except he's only right in cases of Metzia, which is what our mission is really about, So yeah, good. I think we're getting to the heart of the problem here, but. Also, I just want to point out, I don't know what to make of this quite, but we've had a continuous thing in this this chapter of Gemara where the Bavli is using this as a way to comment on Mishnot and Zerayim. Right, we've had a lot of stuff from Peah. We now have a lot of stuff. We have stuff from Maser Sheni. I think it's really, the Bavli, which doesn't have Bavli on Zerayim, nonetheless, it does comment on Zerayim, and it actually kind of, fills it out in places like this that are connected.
Wasn't there was a story about somebody who did this, who like collected together all the Gemaras on a certain Masechta and claimed that he had found and he tried to pawn it off as authentic, that he had just created a Gemara based on other Gemaras.
Well, I think there's two things. There was the fake Yerushalmi on, was it Kodshim or something like that came out in the late 19th century that fooled a lot of people.
Maybe I'm mixing two stories. Yeah.
But no, I think there was like an Israeli scholar. I have to look who it is again. There was a modern-ish Israeli scholar, like a Talmudist, who collected the Bavli on Zerayim and tried and like put it together like a Gemara. No, wasn't trying to fake anything in that case. He was just trying to get what the Bavli on Zerayim might look like, kind of thing. Yeah.
But I still want to go. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I just, on that point, I think it's like it seems relevant to me that there's this in a discussion about like contested ownership. The Gemara is in a certain way saying like, okay, like you can argue with your chaver over this house all you want, but like the real question about property is like how you're gonna redistribute wealth.
Yeah. Well, good. I like that. Right. We're much more interested in how people transfer property to one another at the end of the day.
Yeah, we're more interested in transfer, and we're frankly like, you thought that the question is like, how do I show that this thing is mine and not theirs? No, the real question is, how do I transfer it to this poor person? Like, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't understand what you're saying.
I think, Sarah, can I try to say this?
Yeah,
and see
try.
I think in the middle of a discussion of how do we have people contesting who gets a Metzia, right? The Gemara keeps moving the discussion back to how do I, to pay and here, how do I get my property to a poor person, right? To a person in need, right? That's actually becomes the discussion more often, which is really interesting I hadn't thought about that. It was like,
you're saying,
yeah.
Yeah, like you thought that
going
the question
from selfishness to selflessness.
Yeah, yeah. The question is like, how do I take this thing and get to it faster than Joel? And like, actually, no, the real question you ought to be asking yourself is not like, how do I get this thing faster than, get to it faster than Joel? The question is like, how do I transfer ownership of my property to somebody who really needs it?
Feels like a real yashrut to take on the Gemara. This is good. I like that. But Noam's got the flip side. This is I'll read this. Is rhyme is
Sure.
Sure, that could be the other way that we're
right, especially of the like, well, I don't want this to be shichasa, like, right?
So, but that was the great toast. Did you guys see that Tosfot last time? The Tosfot, which is like, like unless we put some rules on this, that shichasa would never happen, essentially. Okay, good. So that is the answer that's given as Kinyan Agav. And now we're going to get what's the responses to that answer in Surah. So maybe it's a good time to switch readers. Noam, you did lovely, but it's somebody else want to read? Between Jacob, Sarah, and Josie, this is Not that the Rabbeim can't read as well, but like for the moment, we're going to keep you guys out of it. Sarah, can I volunteer you?
I can be volunteered.
There we go.
Okay. Where are we? I'm Marley,
yeah.
Marabanan, is that where we are?
No,
we did that.
Rabbi Zera.
Okay, Rabbi Zera Kibla. So Rabbi Zera thinks like that makes sense. Rabbi Abba lo Kibla. Rabbi Abba is like, no, that doesn't make sense. Amar Rava, Shapir Avid de lo Kibla. So Rava thinks that it makes more sense not to accept this approach. V'chilo haya lahem sudar liknot mimenu bechalipin ela tovat hanaa ena mamun.
Well, I just start with the challenge there, right? His
Right.
challenge here is
His challenge seems to be, well, they didn't have a sudar.
I think he's actually saying what they didn't have a sudar. Like, why go through all this rigmarole?
Why go through this? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you just do kinyan chalipin. Like,
Yeah,
why?
like why there was no emergency here.
Mhm.
All they needed was some object.
Yeah, right. It's like, what does he say? V'chilo hayalahem sudar. Look at the Rashi.
V'chilo haya lahem sudar. Lama lo lekabel mehen ma'ot. Like, why don't you just do some, take some coins or whatever.
Or no, why did they? Why did they accept coins, right? Like,
Yeah.
make this whole thing much easier. Because we remember the whole thing of doing a kinyan agav was they can pay him on the boat.
To avoid, yeah.
But what you could do, you could just do the maser with kinyan chalipin, right? That would be really easy. You don't need it. And then what does he does not do? If he does, actually, this is a good point because this is like, it's very interesting. Rashi doesn't make this comment. Maybe he thinks it's obvious. I had to think about this for a little bit. I'm not as smart as Rashi, but right. What's the advantage of kinyan chalipin? What wouldn't Rabban Gamliel have to do in that case? Open to the group.
Wait, what wouldn't he have to do, or what?
Yeah,
would
if you
he
do kinyan chalipin, what can you avoid?
Well, he doesn't ever have to give them like rented possession of their land.
Exactly. He could avoid the whole
Or of
land
his
thing.
land, which
Chalipin.
seems advantageous for him.
Yeah, it's like this whole story becomes really like they didn't have a sudar on the boat. Like, come on, like it's really easy to do kinyan chalipin at the end of the day. Why not just do that?
Maybe he want. Oh, well,
Go for it, Rav Nachum. It's
he wanted the money.
good. It could actually be that. Yeah.
He wanted. He was trying to make money off his miser.
Yeah. It's
because he can rent the land.
So of course they get right as Rashi's right. Actually, not just Rashi. If nikablu zemize schar, right? That there actually is. That's the end of the Mishnah. There actually is a monetary exchange, but they also would get the benefit of the land at the end of the day. So
I also wonder whether part of this is not he wants the money because he's just like a, I don't know, miserly person or something. But he wants the money because
he wants to buy an ice cream on the boat. I say he wants to buy an ice cream on the boat. He's not miserly, he just needs some money.
yeah.
Yeah.
Actually,
like 2nd century boat concession stands. It just seems like maybe actually what's underneath this is some discomfort with kinyan chalipin.
Good with kinyan chalipin. That's also possible.
They're like this is, and maybe it's just again, like I don't know the historical stuff that well, but I could see a world in which like that's kind of how most commerce works, and so we're not gonna do this wacky thing. We're just gonna I'm gonna give you money.
Yeah,
this is what's gonna happen. Like we're just gonna do things in a kind of more normal, like I don't know. I would have to know a lot more about the historical context of purchasing and
I have something to say in
parallel legal systems to say that with any confidence.
Yeah, Jacob, go for it. Then I'll say something.
I was just saying, especially with Rabban Gamliel being the Nasi and like a representative of the people in that way, just being more stringent on what types of kinyan he uses makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's we've already seen, by the way, we've kind of seen this, but it's not so clear even in the Rishonim like how kinyan chalipin works. They're not always clear who gives what to whom, right? There's actually debates about this. So kinyan chalipin is kind of an unfleshed out kinyan in the Gemara in that sense, right? I think it shows up all over the place, but it's not kind of played out. How does it work? So it might be that it's just it's a little strange. People don't quite know how. I'm speculating here. This is no But so I don't know if anyone has a thought about it. They know a sugya that supports or doesn't support that. But So it's a good question. I think it's a really important question. Okay, and we're seeing one of the beautiful things I think about this sugya is we're actually seeing, right, all these concepts in Kiddushin of how kinyanim work are coming back here, right, or are playing out. So this is a question mishpat at the end of the day. So good. Let's see, Sarah, you want to read a little bit more if you don't mind.
Hachanami tovat hana'a ina mamon liknot al gabei karka.
Oh,
So-
sorry. Elo Tavatana. One line up.
Oh, sorry. I just skipped a line for some reason. Ela tovat hana'a ina mamon liknot mimena bechalipin. Hachanami tovat hana'a ina mamon liknot al gabei karka.
Good. So explain.
So there's this general thing we're gonna call tovat hana'a, which is like the kind of benefit that comes from picking who the stuff goes to.
Exactly.
And so that we're gonna say is not something that can be acquired through a chalipin.
Mm-hmm. So good. So, I want to play this out a little bit as we. So go for it, Sarah. What you're saying.
So given that we can't, that tovat hana'a has to be part of this transaction, but it can't be done through halipin. So that's why they didn't choose to do halipin.
Good.
They obviously had stuff on the boat that they could have used, but they didn't.
So I want to play it a little bit even further, right? What is maser, right? When I give maser to a Levi, right? Am I even? I'm kind of giving it to them in matana, but what is that maser before I give it, right? Does it really belong to me? No, right? It's like all I get is the choice of which Levi I give it to, but it's really belongs to like the Levim class to some extent, right? It's
You're like
not
the you're like the executor or the epitropos.
exactly. Yeah.
You're the epitropos of this thing. You have rights to determine who gets it for the Levim.
Mhm. But that's it, right? It's I can't choose like, oh, I'm going to give it to Yisrael or instead, right? It's not really a kinyan in the same way that we're used to, and so it falls under kind of different laws. And Chalipin, maybe we'll look at the Rashi, right? It's interesting. Why does Chalipin not work there? So maybe Sarah, read the Rashi. Ena chashuva mamon, I believe is the Rashi there. Yeah.
Ina chashuva mamon, didien nikneit b'chalipin, delegale marki kanale Rabban Gamliel haisudar akne chalipin didei, b'chol makom shehen, dekivan in lo bahem ela tuvat hana'a, shebiyado l'teto l'chol mi sheyirtzeh, Enzo chashuva mamon l'chol, although kinyan chalipin. So it's only like he has this privilege to give it to someone else, but like that's not mammon in the sense of just like property that can be exchanged because it doesn't have value to someone else.
And chalipin has to be done with something that actually has like value in a monetary way that tovat hana'a does not, right? That's what Rashi's saying there. A pretty powerful statement about what tovat hana'a is, which this is the concept I know, I said, I don't know a lot of Gemara, but it shows up a lot in the Gemara, this concept of tovat hana'a, and exactly what it is. Like, is it, how does it fit in the commercial world? And it doesn't quite fit as to like the same way as if I'm selling you a watch, right? We can do kinyan chalipin. Here I'm selling you this more ethereal concept of I have the privilege, right? As Rashi says very nicely there, right? The ein lo bahen ela tavatan, as you read, shebado letito lechol mi sheyirtzeh, and ein zo chashuva mamon, right? That's not mamon, right? That's something else. It's a different concept of commerce. So that's the reason that you couldn't do kinyan chalipin, except, right? The Gemara, you read this already. What does the Gemara say in response to that?
If that's true, then it must be that it was a kinyan chatzer because the tovat hana'a can't be a kinyan agav.
Well,
it transfers to a kinyan agav.
Oh yeah, beautiful. You said it beautifully. Yeah, right, exactly. So it also, right, if you think it doesn't work for chalipin, then how do you think agav works? Agav is the same thing, right?
Which doesn't seem obvious to me at all, by the way, but I don't know. Like that Chomer doesn't make sense to me, but
Can you
Maybe other
speak
people
more
will be
about
thinking
this?
it.
Can you speak more about this Tovat Hana'ah? Why is Tovat Hana'ah a relevant factor here? Isn't he just trying to mizake the ani, in this thing? He's not trying to get his own Tovat Hana'ah.
The Tovat Hana'ah is determining who's giving that, right? Or who gets it. The Tovat Hana'ah is that he gets to say, this Maser Rishon doesn't just belong to any Levi, it belongs to Yehoshua. Is to say, I specifically want Akiva to be handing out the Maser Ani. It's interesting because even those Tovat Hana'ah, when it comes to that, feels a little less specific than the one of like because like the Levi, it's like, oh yeah, I'm helping my buddy. Here you go, Yehoshua. Whereas like in the Ani, he still has sort of limited control over that. But either way, there is a benefit. There is like a perceivable benefit to being able to decide where your property goes, even if you're not.
But usually isn't Kinyan Khalifin that there's two things, that there's the handkerchief and then the other thing. I give you the handkerchief, you give me the other thing. Now here we have seems like we have three things going on, because there'd be a handkerchief on the boat, and then there would be the Maaser going to the Levi. So why wouldn't the Levi give me a handkerchief? Oh, because the Levi's not here? Is that the point? I mean, why
No,
there?
Levi's-
It seems like there's three things going on. There's
Levi's
there's the Tovat Hana'ah, there's the handkerchief, and then there's the Maaser itself. So why do we
I
care about
don't
the
own it.
whole Tovat Hana'ah out of the picture, and we just have these two things?
So we're good. I want to we'll go sequentially by people here, just because we'll go Josie, Sarah, and then Rav Lexi. Go for it, Josie. This is a great question.
I'm looking at it from a slightly different look. The Tovat Hana'ah is a non-transferable right. Okay, Rabbi Gamliel has this.
Why doesn't he just mevater on that thing?
So it's always, but he's not transferring that right. He's not saying that's not the Tovat Hana'ah is not the thing that's being transferred, right?
Exactly. The Maaser is being transferred.
The Maaser is the thing being transferred. The Tovat Hana'ah is not something that's being transferred, and so why would it even be part of this question of it's something of value that is being, if you want to translate Tovat Hana'ah as the ability to choose to whom you give your Maaser and to whom you give your Maaser Ani, then you're not actually transferring that. That's not the thing that's being given over. The thing that's being given over is the Maaser. And that
I think that's my question. I think that's my question.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the answer is maybe the
Hana'ah doesn't have, is just the ability of the giver to decide who the recipient is. And that once that's given, it's not like, it's a little bit different from Maaser Ani, because once again, the Gabbai does have, but that investiture is a different investiture. Like, once the Maaser is given to Yehoshua ben Nehemiah, right? That's already that's a done thing. That's a one and done. There's no more transferable anything. Like, there's your Maaser, congratulations. The Maaser Ani, once again, a little bit different, because the Gabbai can then redistribute it. But that's a right along with the stuff that came along with it. That's not the right of the Maaser Ani. That's not the Maaser Ani.
So I have a semi answer to this, but I want to go to Sarah first, and then we'll see if you guys like my, other than Rav Lexi, and then if my answer is relevant still, I'll throw it out there. But
So one thing is just maybe the Tovat Hana'ah is transferred in the case of the Maser Oni, and it's transferred to the Gabbai. And so then if we're talking about a right, we're saying when you give the money to Akiva, it says go and give this to the Aniim, what you are doing is transferring two things. You're transferring actual money, and you're transferring the right to distribute that money to Aniim of your selection. And so then we do have to come up with a story about how that Tovat Hana'ah is transferred, because it has to be that it's transferred, at least in the case of the
yeah, I actually think in that case the Akiva ben Yosef works much better than the case of Rabbi Yehoshua, right?
Right. So maybe that's one explanation. In which case, then we have a problem, which is like, well, it works better for one case than another. So maybe that creates some sort of issue. But the other thing is, it might just be that we're not talking about three distinct things, the way Rav Nachum was saying. We're actually just saying that, like, anytime Maaser is transferred, it goes with this other thing, right? Or this other thing is sort of stuck to it in some way, and that's the tovat hana'ah. I just wonder whether, like Josie was saying, it's a non-transferable right to choose, but I also wonder whether it's some sort of more literal like benefit that comes from, like, I give my money to like I give my maser to like this particular Levi, and now I'm like buddies with this Levi. And maybe down the line, when I'm, I don't know, in some sort of other pickle, that Levi is going to be disposed to be nice to me, right?
I'm running to an Irmi clot, and I need someone to
Or like, I don't know, you don't have to come up with such a crazy case, right? It just can be like, he's gonna just be like nice to me. I don't know, or he's either nice to me or he's like beholden, depending on how you want to think about it. But at least there's like, I wonder whether there's a way to think about this, not as like, oh, this is my right to choose, but it's actually like recognizing that when you give these things to a specific person, there's a kind of social context that comes with that. And that social context has value in the marketplace.
I've definitely seen that in the case of Truma with a Kohen, right? That you get advantages of giving a Kohen.
Yeah, it seems like, anyway, so maybe that's where I'm getting from, but yeah.
So whether that it works for Maser Ani, I don't know. Like that's an interesting question, but I mean, they think it does. But
it won't work for Maser Ani because like they have such low social status, and like what?
Yeah, that would be the thing. Is like, what do you? Yeah, maybe if they become rich later.
No, like I think it can be. They're like beholden to me.
I mean, I guess the whole point of Great Expectations, right? The novel, right, is this idea that you help somebody when they were escaping from prison, and when they become rich later in life, they're gonna help you out. It's
yeah.
People haven't read Great Expectations. Sorry, Charles Dickens is a great writer. Crazy guy, but great writer. Lexi, I think Rough Lexi, you had a thought too.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes down to it, going back to what Joel was saying earlier, the main question is, does Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel actually own this in a meaningful enough way that he can transfer it as a monetary transfer? Like essentially the question, like Rashi spells this out, that like if it's a kinyan chatzer, it's fine because it can be understood as like a hefker essentially that can be acquired through a chatzer. But for it to be done through chalifin, he has to own it. And so in general, like he doesn't really own it. As Joel said, it is like vaguely the property of the Levim. And so if we say tovat hana'ah is some sort of quantifiable monetary right, we can say that actually, even though he doesn't really own the maaser itself, the ability to decide where it goes is a form of quantifiable ownership such that he could transfer it as if it were his own property. Or we say no, like the fact that you get to decide where this goes, sure, there is some benefit you accrue from that. It is just not significant enough to count as any form of meaningful ownership. Therefore, you can't transfer this through means of transfer that require it being your property.
Yeah, it's going back in some ways to what Rav Nachum said earlier about. Sorry, Rav Nachum, did you want to reply?
No, I just agree with Lexi. I think that's the point. I think that I mean, I wouldn't say it's not existent, but it's, in other words, he's already mafresh that truma, and he's already mafresh this maaser. It's already not his, and so he's not actually giving it to the other guy. He's just, all he has left, the only little hold he still has on it is deciding where it goes, and that doesn't transfer with the kinyan chalifin. Why exactly not with the kinyan chalifin? I don't know, but it does work with other kinds of kinyan.
Yeah. So the way I was imagining it in my head, this is a very visual version of it, is I separate my maaser, and it's got like a dotted line to every Levi out there, and I get to decide which line gets filled in. That's all I get. That's what I can transfer to somebody is filling in the line and nothing more. It's like a zikat to everybody, and you decide which one of them actually gets the thing in the end. It actually makes it more like a metzia in that sense, right? It's not quite dat acheret in the sense, right? It's not. I'm not. All I'm doing is maybe giving advantage to who can grab this thing at the end of the day. Maybe that's why, and I think why doesn't chalipin work? I'm not 100% sure, but I think the idea is chalipin is really, that's what happens in the marketplace, right? That's the prototypical type of transferring of ownership, and not this kind of thing, which is separate from that. But that's not a good answer, I don't think. But it's a partial answer. At the end of the day, I think the Gemara is gonna have trouble with this to begin with. It's gonna come up with a different explanation. But I wanted, before we do that, I wanted to, oh, how are we doing on time? I think we're okay. Well, there's one Rashi I want to see because I think it was just like, so oh wait a second. If Kinyan Chalipin doesn't work, then how in the world does Kinyan Chatzer work? Right? Like, why does that affect it? So there's a Rashi here I think is really interesting.
I want to explain why. I have an answer, by the way.
Oh, please, yeah, Rav Nachum. Yeah.
I have an answer why Kinyan Khalifin doesn't work.
Go for it.
And I'm just thinking of this on the spot. Because Kinyan Khalifin is really barter. It's not Kinyan Kesef. It's barter. It's trading two things.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing has to be a thing. The thing has to be a thing. It can't be a tovat hana'ah because it's barter. But by money, you can buy anything with money. I can buy services with money. I can buy a service with money, but you can't do khalifin with it. You can't trade. I mean, I don't know. What I'm saying is you can't trade, even though my cousin actually did this, made a system for this, but you can't trade haircuts for apple pies. In other words, you can trade things for things. You can't change it. My cousin actually got sued by the IRS because she set up a whole computer system, it's like 25 years ago, to just trade services and things with each other, all kept on our network.
That's amazing. No, I think that's really interesting though too, right? The idea that is a service for a thing is different from trading a thing for a thing. And Chalipin is meant for things. It's not meant for services for things. I like that explanation. It's very good.
Something like that. I mean, you have to think about, there is hitchayvuyot, like on a ketubah, we could do Chalipin for the hitchayvuyot of the ketubah. But that's not a service, that's a monetary, that's like, it's not really a service, it's a debt.
The debt.
The debt. Yeah, that's actually
setting aside. You could do.
Yeah, it's setting aside your money, right? At the end of the day, right? Because you could do, if you don't have a ketubah, you're allowed to, at least b'diavad, set aside money, right, for the sake of the ketubah.
So I'm saying it's like so it's almost like, so the Chalifin, if it's for a tovat hana'ah, that's not a thing. Maybe services are maybe too far of a stretch. Let's just say tovat hana'ah. That's already not a thing.
So, but
anyway,
we set up a website for the Tovat Hana'ah exchange, but that's anyway. Sarah, are you still readable for this Rashi here, or should we throw it to somebody else?
If we could throw it to someone else, that'd be great.
Great.
Sorry.
Maybe Jacob, do you want to read this Rashi here? Eno mamon liknot al gabei karka. Just remember, the Gemara said, right? It said, well, wait, you can't do chalipim for Tovat Hana'ah, and then it said, well, wait a second, you also can't do kinyan agav for Tovat Hana'ah in that case. So how would kinyan chatzer work? Which is what Rashi's going to explain here. So
yeah. Okay, so in a mamon liknot al gabei karka, kinyan she karka niknebo. Ella afkure ba'alma afker Rabbihu. So that's for a kinyan that the land is actually acquired with. But if I'm just making the land hefker.
Not the land. He's going to make the Maser hefker.
Oh, the Maser. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
I can make.
Or not the Maser. Sorry, the Tovat Hana'ah, right? Essentially.
Tovat Hana'ah.
Yeah, it's something like that. It's a little weird, but
I mean, I think it is the Maser, right?
It's
essentially, like, he doesn't really properly own it, but he also does have the ability essentially to render it ownerless. It's a weird sort of in between.
Okay, this is why I went back and forth on this. I was like, what is it he actually gets to mafkir, right? It's if you don't fully own something. But all right, good. So
like he can make hefker.
Yeah, afker gabayhu, he makes it hefker towards them, right?
Right. Okay. Oh, okay.
And then what happens?
Uchi ugar lahu makom kanto lahu chatzero v'torat chatzer kishar hefker. When I like rent to them, is that ugars?
Yeah.
You
rent them the land.
The land. land acquires for them in Torah Chatzer and Torah Kinyan Chatzer, like anything else that's Hefker.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
So what you do is you make the Maser something maybe it is Tavatana. I think the Maser makes more sense. You make that Hefker.
Yeah.
That's what Rabban Gamliel did. They made the Maser Hefker, and then he rents them the land, and the Maser on the land gets acquired to them as a Kinyan Chatzer, which brings us back to our original problem against Ula of like it seems like you don't have to be by the Chatzer to rent the land. But as a huge side note, but we're not going to go there. I don't think time wise. There's a whole question of like, isn't Rabban Gamliel's like Maser sitting in a storehouse that's Mishtameret? Like, doesn't this throw out the entire problem? Just want to flag. And in fact, there's even a Yerushalmi that in I think it's Maser Rishon that brings up that his Chatzer is Mishtameret. But okay, side note for the moment, Jacob, I want to go back to the Gemara because I want to before we go on break, I want to kind of close out this piece here. So do the Velohi.
Velohi. Tanot Kahuna Natina Kiva Buhu. Halipin Makakum Memkarhu. Metalton Agav Karka Natina.
2 more words.
Alimtahi.
Yeah, or Alimata, or Alimta, yeah.
Yeah. So this is not the case. This framing that if you can't that this framing with Tovat Hana sorry, I'm a bit out of it today, but
It's
this
okay, no,
framing
you're doing great. It's
Tovat Hana by Khalipin
I think it's really a question of why Chalipin wouldn't work, but Kinyan Agav would work. He's like that answer
Right,
that Kinyan
exactly.
Agav also wouldn't work isn't true. What's actually going on with Truma and Mas or with Maser?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So by Matano Kahuna,
Yeah, which by the way, we see here, Matano Kahuna is a general term for not just Lavdafka Kahuna, right? Just any
Right.
gifts, right?
Right. Nitina Kiva, it's a form of giving.
Yeah, the pasuk says noten, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kalipin derech makakum memkarhu. So Kalipin is a way of acquisition with makakum memkar.
And therefore, and not what?
It's not Nitina.
Yeah, it's not a matana, right? This is a way of bartering. This is simple barter, right? But what is Kinyan Agav?
So Mutatlin Agav Karka Nitina Alimtahi. Alimata. Yeah. So Kinyan Agav is a gift. Or like saying it's a gift is stronger or
It's a strong form of Natina, right? I would say.
okay, got it.
This is a good way. I remember the Rashi before said you can give a matana via Kinyan Agav, right? So
Right.
that's exactly why that Rashi came in. This is Natina. So you can transfer Tovatan via Kinyan Agav. You can't transfer it via Chalipin because Chalipin is about exchange. And that's not a giving a gift, but Agav is about giving a gift, and therefore it works. So at the end of the day, how did Rabban Gamliel give this Maser? What was his Kinyan method?
It was at least with this answer, because we still haven't seen Rav Papa, but at least with this answer, it's Kinyan Agav. It's a Natina in the form of Kinyan Agav.
Exactly. And therefore it's not a challenge to Ula. Right. Answer number 1. We go to break, we come back, Rav Papa. All right. Okay, so we were at the point where we had the initial solution, which is that this is a Kinyan Agav, which is, from the Beit Midrash of Surah. By the way, I'm throwing out some side things because we're not doing everything, God willing, we could have another month and do all this stuff. But interesting of the kind of the Eretz Yisrael versus Bavel stuff going on here. There's some interesting things, especially with Rebbe Zera, who eventually makes Aliyah, not accepting this answer and so forth. But for another time.
He does accept it.
But Rabbi Zera, sorry, Rabbi Zera accepts it. You're right, Rabbi Zera accepts it. Yeah, other way. So it's actually very interesting in that sense. But Rabbi Abba, who also is Eretz Yisraeli, does not accept it. There you go. Rabbi Zera, who was originally a Bavli. Okay, but let's go to Rav Papa and his answer, which doesn't rely on Kinyan Agav. So maybe, Josie, you want to read some?
Sure. So we're starting with Rav Papa.
Yes.
Okay. So Rav Papa Amar, Damata Heret Magnotan. Shani.
I think Data Cheret Makneotan Shani.
Shani. So there's a different way. It's a different thought process or different intent that's going on here, and that's how the acquisition is going on. Uminatemra.
Well, before we do that, I want to see one Rashi here just to explain that a little bit more. Rav Papa Amar. Look at that Rashi.
Just want to find it. Rav Papa Amar le'olam b'torat hatzer kna'am. Ve'afilu hachi lo tikshi la'ola dehada lo ba'inan hacha ome b'tzad hasadeh mishum deda'at aheret makne otam. Sheraban Gamliel hikna lahen mitaltalin shahayu lo b'chatzer shalahen v'lo hifkira
Or Mehiv Kira Kanu. They didn't, right? They didn't get it.
Kira Kanu. V'nocham emenazo liknod v'af algav de'en omed b'tzad hasadeh.
Good.
So this is all. So Rav Papa is saying it was always the case of Kinyan Hatzer.
And so, why is it a problem for Ula?
And in spite of this, it's not a problem for Ula. Because Ula doesn't require them to have been standing at the side of their sadeh in order to acquire it at the time.
Hacha, in this case in particular, why?
Mishum the dad acheret makne, because there's this idea of dad acheret, which we're going to expound upon momentarily.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. We don't actually do the rest, right? You don't have to do the rest.
It's
not from Hefker. You read it, right? It's matana. Well, actually, no. The end. V'nocha matana zoliknot. Right. That's actually really the interesting words, I think, to me. But what's nocha matana zoliknot?
It's okay for him to acquire it through this.
I'd say it's easier, right? That the standards are lower for matana than they are for hefker. It's a really, I think, important concept here of like that when dat acheret is involved, we lower the standards we have as to how the kinyan works. So, okay, that's going to be the entire point of Rav Papa, and now he's going to prove it, right? Well, the Gemara is going to prove it. So keep going in the Gemara.
And so where do we get this from? So we get this directly from our associated Mishnah.
Yeah, it's interesting you say directly. This is like a very common Gemara. I think of like we're going to get it from the way we explain the Mishnah, essentially, right? Or the way we discuss.
Wait, can you just give a working definition for dat acheret, or why there is dat acheret in the matana? Just speak that out.
You want me to do it? I'm happy to, unless someone. I'll do it. I think that we've been dealing with Metzia where nobody owns it. It's kind of there's no choice in the matter of who gets it. Nobody's making a choice as to who gets it. However, when somebody owns an object or a thing and they want to give it to somebody else, right? They have a choice. So it's not like it's a competition between different people. And when it's not a competition between different people, it's clear you can go ask. We had this at the very beginning when we said that this was Mekach Memkar, that Shnai no Chazin was also the case. And why don't we just ask the person who sold it? Who'd you sell it to? Right? It's a very different case in the sense where the person who owned it beforehand can say, I didn't intend for those other people who got to it first to get it. I intended for this guy to get it. And therefore, you don't need to be there to beat other people to the punch, right? You just, as long as the person's intention was you, we don't require too much for them to transfer it. We still require a transfer, but not as much of a standard.
Right. We sometimes call this dat makne. Here we're calling it dat acheret.
Yeah. So, but we've seen dat makne actually, right, so far in this chapter. Good. All right, so let's see, how do we understand this Mishnah? So keep going, Josie, and the Gemara.
Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, v'hu sheratz acharehen, umagian, right? Uvai Rabbi Yirmiyah b'matana, heach kabbalah.
Heach, b'matana heach.
I'm saying.
And then keep going.
Kibla, I'm sorry, Vikabla mine.
Yeah, a little bit more.
I'm sorry. Vikabla mine Rabbi Abba bar Kahana. Afa opi sharatzachem ve'en magian ve'en magian. Period. Sorry, I didn't have
a little bit more, but let's just stop there for the moment and we'll do the shani. So
my tama lav mishum dedat acheret makneh otan.
Or makneh otan shani, right? Is not
Shani.
Yeah.
Amar.
No, stop there. Okay, this is the whole proof here. The next part's a challenge. So
Sorry, I didn't have the pointillation marked out on my Gemara.
It's okay. So how does Rabbi Yochanan limit our Mishnah, and how does Rabbi Yirmiyah then expand, or not expand the Mishnah, but expand a new case essentially from it?
Right. So Rabbi Yirmiyah is going to start with Rabbi Yochanan's position that somebody who chased after them and could reach them, or reach
exactly
them.
Right. This is
actually you had to actually catch up to whatever was lollygagging across your field.
Yeah, I don't think you actually have to catch them. I think it may be just in potential, right? That you have the potential
That
when
you
you're
could have
sitting by your
caught them.
field. Yeah.
Yeah.
In other words, you see a tzvi shavur running across your field, your field can acquire it for you as long as if you decided to put in the effort, you could have actually caught this thing. You don't have to put in the effort. Your field helps you out you get to relax, right? But you could have, as long as you could have done it, right? Yeah, in fact, read the Rashi, V'hu shirat zacharehen, just to help this out. This is where I got this from.
Hatzvi mehalech v'hagozalot medadin umatnitin dekatani zachta lo sadehu kigon shehaya yachol larotz achreyan.
Beautiful.
Hodem she'etzu misadehu. So that you could conceivably, if you had physically or emotionally desired to get to them, you could have.
Exactly. So, all right, that's a huge okimta, by the way, on our Mishnah. I think, at least to me, it feels like a huge. The Mishnah sounds like the Mishnah originally sounds like if they go through your field and you say, maybe you do or don't say whatever, your field acquires for you. We limited it to as long as you're by the field, in the field. Now we're like, and you could have caught them. So if your field is enormous, right, and they're on the other side of the field, you're standing by your field doesn't help, right? You have to be in proximity enough, and it's a speed game as well here. So, okay, great. And except, what does Rabbi Yirmiyah ask then? He has a question about this.
How does this work by a gift? Right? Kabla mine Rabbi Abba bar Kahana. So I wasn't quite sure exactly how to translate this, but so Rabbi Abba bar Kahana sort of
Can I help you out here for a minute? If
Yeah,
that's
please
okay.
do, because
Right, this is one of those cases where the question is the answer, right? And in fact, let me read the Rashi here because I think the Rashi is very helpful. Is it kibla mine Rabbi Abba? Kibla mine Rabbi Abba lahach baya mi Rabbi Yirmiyah. The shapir dak sheyesh chiluk ben matana lefker matana afal pi v'chule. Right, right. So in other words, he's like, yeah, that's a great question. I that distinction is correct. You're correct to ask that question because matana is different. That's exactly what he's saying. So. This is we see these kind of questions all the time, right? Where somebody asks a question which is proving the answer. In other words, like because it's a good question, it proves that there's a distinction made in a certain case.
Even though he runs after them, and Magian, even if he chases after them and he doesn't reach up to them. And I couldn't piece together clearly how this answered that sort of like, yeah, that's a good question, even though he couldn't catch up to them.
Yeah, in other words, even if you couldn't catch up to them, if instead of you a hefker tzvi running, let's use the birds. Actually, I think it's a better example for them because I don't want to. If there are hefker birds waddling through your field, but they can't fly, right? Then you, in order to be able to own them, have to be able to catch them. But if I decide to give you birds that don't fly, right? Then you don't have to be able to catch them as long as they're in your fields. That's good. Okay. Sorry, I was looking at the chat at the same time as I was saying that. So does that make sense? Right. In other words, for matana, the standard is lower. Now, what's going to be interesting, I'll throw this out as the question. I think this is the question I'm trying to get to a little bit of, like, how much lower? Does that mean what if I give you flying birds, right, as a matana? Do you also, like, is the whole distinction, like, put it differently, a whole distinction between tzvi shavur and tzvi shiratz kedarko, just the fact that one you can catch up to and one you can't? And therefore, you just don't, for matana, I don't care how fast the thing is moving. It doesn't matter if you can catch it, can't catch it. Doesn't matter how fast it's moving. It's yours as long as it goes through your field. Or is it, yeah, you don't have to be able to catch up with it, but it still has to be a slow moving object in order for you to acquire it for matana.
And I guess the nafkamina from there is that if it's a fast moving deer and Reuben gives it to Shimon and says, here is your deer, and it comes running through your field, and it goes into Levi's field. Afterwards, Shimon can say that was mine. But if it's a hefker animal, Shimon can't necessarily make that claim. And if Levi stops the animal and catches it, then Levi can acquire it.
And the other version of it is it's a fast moving, deer, and it goes through the guy's field. And we're like, that's nice that he tried to give it to you, but that wasn't a very good, effective way to giving. The thing just ran across the field in 3 seconds. That's not giving, right? That's something flying across your field, essentially. So Rav Nachum looks like you might have a thought there.
But nonetheless, you could still say it's mine. If it were Reuven's and he gave it to Shimon and Reuven said, here, take it. And it ran, he had a leash on it, and then the leash got let go and it ran across the field, right? Shimon's field could acquire it for him, but if it were just a hefker animal, Shimon's field could not. And then
Well, I think what we're saying though is, yeah, dat, acheret shane, but if you can't have no king, right? You have to have some reasonable method of exchange still. It's not like the thing can just fly across your field and that works. So Rav Nachum, go for it.
Yeah, here's what I'm thinking. Migian and not Migian is not a binary question. Because it's relative. If the deer is partially damaged, but I can get to it before it gets out, then that's called Migian. So when we say that you can acquire it if the people are makne it to you, if they're giving it to you, maybe it's because for you it's not Migian, but for them it is. So they have sort of possession of it at the moment, so they can give it to you. That's what I'm thinking.
Say it one more time. Sorry, you can't get it, but they can. This is the Metzia case, right?
You're asking this question whether I'm trying to think about your question about whether once they say you can have it, isn't that what we just learned? That if they say you can have it, then even if you can't reach it, it's yours.
Yeah.
And you were trying to understand why that should be. So what if it's like a fast moving deer? I can't reach it. So now all of a sudden they say I can have it. So I would say no. If it's a deer that nobody could get, then no. It's only because they can get it. You can't get it though, because you're further. You couldn't get it because by the time you approached it, it would already crossed the border and gone into the woods. But so it's a slow moving animal, but you can't get it, but they can get it. That's what I'm thinking.
In other words, as long as somebody can catch it as a matana, you can keep it. But if nobody can catch it, then it's out of bounds for everybody.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's the way to make sense of it, I think.
Yeah, I like that. So but, I don't know if people had other thoughts about this split here. This is really how the halachic split's going to happen, right? Of to how expansive does matana shane go?
In other words, the Megian and the Shavur is a Hefsa Gavra thing, right? The Gavra, the animal is Shavur, but I still have to be able to, as a Gavra, be able to get to it.
Yeah.
Right. Part of it is like, are we judging based off of every individual case, right? Is it like genuinely in each scenario, you have to assess like, how fast am I? Where is the animal positioned in the field? How big is my field? How fast is the animal? And like, could I realistically have gotten to it? Or do we have certain sort of like paradigms of what are reachable animals or not, right? And this is almost like explanatory, right? Like a tzvi shavur is the kind of animal that we think like an abled adult human can catch, right?
No,
like
I understand Rav Yochanan as adding this point. V'hu sharatz acharehen u'megian, that he himself could reach it.
Well, good. I mean, let's go to Noam first, and then I want to put all this together a little bit.
My thoughts are a little bit in logical tangles, so I hope this makes sense. But if I understand what's happening here correctly, then I find it kind of weird. So that's a big F. But it's like Rabbi Yirmiyah has shown us through his question that there's this criterion that applies in cases of hefker that wouldn't apply in a case of a matana, and that criterion is actually being able to reach it. And then from that, we're proving, which this is the part I find weird, that this other criterion of ula, standing next to the field, that also only would apply in a case of hefker, but not in a case of matana, thereby supporting the chiluk of Rav Papa, right? Like,
yes.
But what I find weird is that just feels like a kal vachomer that's going in the wrong direction to me. Like, as if being able to reach something is a more machmir criterion, whereas just standing next to a field, like you said before, would feel kind of more makil. Anyway.
Yeah, one of the ways you can look at it is what is standing next to your field? That is what he means is if you have to be in a case where you're able to catch it, right? That actually is what's standing.
But you're just saying they're different words for the same thing. Okay.
Exactly.
They're not different criteria.
Yeah, they're the same thing potentially, right? Or
that one is a subset of the other.
Oh, great. Yeah, good point, Rav Lexi. Yeah, Gory. So, but
you're saying, Rav Lexi, that standing next to your field is a subset of being able to catch something. No, I'm going
other way. Yeah, being able to catch. Yeah, so being able to catch something is a subset of standing next to your field. So
it's interesting because it is literally not, but you could kind of just treat it.
Well, this is, by the way, you guys talked about this last time. See, I was listening while I was driving across the country. But I think it was a really interesting point, right? Of standing next to the field. There's a whole discussion of like, what does it mean next to the field? Besides today, does that mean in the field? Does that mean
I missed last class, so that's helpful.
You did? Okay, yeah. I think it's a really important. This comes out of the Rishonim as well. Right? The important discussion of like, where are you physically located? It sounds like besides today, it means you have some control over the situation. Might be a way to put it. Right? You have made it as if your physical presence makes it as if it's a chatzer mishtamer because you could get to the thing. That's one way of seeing it. A lot of people do see it as like you can create a non-mishtameret field into a mishtameret field if you are there and physically and close enough in proximity to the thing that you could get it. So Which, by the way, for a Metzia may not be much, right? It's like, oh yeah, as long as I can, walk over to it, my field gives me an advantage. But for something that's moving, it's a whole other question. The other, by the way, extreme version of this that we'll see is the field itself acquires for you, even if you couldn't ever get to it, right? That it's just its presence in the field manages to grab it for you, at least for a matana. So, Rav Lexi.
I think something that helps understand those, in some ways, conflation of the standing next to the field and the reaching it that happens here is the notion that will come up on the top of Yabet Amud Aleph, which is that, and again, which whatever mostly is agreed upon as how the field is functioning, which is that it's not a shaliach anymore when you're standing there, but it's actually an extension of your hand, right? That like part of the issue is when it's a chatzer she'eno mishtameret, it can't really function as a shaliach for you. Some would say it never does, but like minimally when it's eno mishtameret, you don't have someone who can't reliably do something be your shaliach, right? So actually the only way for a chatzer ha'eno mishtameret to acquire is through the mechanism of yad, right? If it functioning as an extension of your physical person, right? And so if that's what we understand the Omed B'tzad Zadehu is doing, right, is that it's actually a form of yad, then it's about being able essentially to grasp something, right? Being able to be in physical contact with something, right? So even though in some ways we think about it more broadly, like I agree that being able to chase down a deer and being able to stand next to a field aren't intuitively necessarily the same. I think that's part of what's happening here with the conflation.
Yeah.
Right, that was actually the point we made last week that the Lexi made last week, which I thought was really very nice, which is that the standing next to it is yad, and that fits with a group with divorce being able to work because you're there, because then the field is functioning as a yad, which can be even against your will because you're there. So we can, I guess you can be forced when you're there. When you're not there, nobody can force you to do anything.
Exactly. Yeah, which we're about to see actually. So we'll this is a good transition back to the Gemara. Maybe Noam, I'm gonna pick on you again if that's okay. We'll go back around here. If you don't mind, Rav Papa. I actually lost my place. La mishum nedata cheret magneotan shani. Okay, Amarli Rav Simi Rav Papa. That's where we are.
I can read, but I have to confess I didn't really get this far. I mean, I kind of skimmed it, but I didn't really.
I'll do the get part. Why not? I'll do some reading and then we'll come back to if people don't mind.
Just tell me where we're starting from.
It's Amar Le Rav Simi Le Rav Papa. It's I don't know how many lines up. 3, 6, probably like 7 lines up from the bottom. Maybe 8. Sorry, 8. So I'm not one of those people who has that great ability to just look at it and know how many lines it is. So it's Rav Isaac can do that, by the way, if anyone's ever seen it. It's quite a skill. So all right. Amar Le Rav Simi Le Rav Papa. All right, so he says, Hari get data cheret magneota. Right? You have a get, the case of a get, you clearly, right, the Baal is giving the get to his soon-to-be ex-wife. Ve'amar Ula, right? Ula himself. Vehu shomeret b'tzad beita o b'tzad chatzera. Right? Says, and that only works, though, if she's standing there, right, next to her house or next to her chatzera when you throw the get in, right? We have cases you can throw a get into a woman's courtyard and it acquires for her, but as long as she's there, right? Which sounds like Ula doesn't think that data cheret makes it different, right? Sounds like he thinks it's the same thing. So, all right. But then the Gemara answers, or maybe it's Rav Papa, I don't know. Shani get diite bal korcha, right? Get is different because get can be given against her will, right? And I'll read the Rashi here. Just as it's a little shani get diite bal korcha. Shehu notnola v'lo nechala megarsha, right? He gives it to her, and it's not. She doesn't want to be divorced. In other words, because it's against her will, she has to physically be present. There is the idea coming out of this. All right. Kind of, it's getting into this whole thing of right. You can't if you're going to force something to do something, you actually have to have the person there. Is the idea. Okay. But here's the problem. Madkifa. This actually was a discussion that I think came up last week, right? Of like, well, wait a second. How does that relate to the free will version of this? Madkifla, right? You can a gift I can accept, freely, or can decide not to accept. Matkiv la Rav Sheshet, Bray the Rav Idi, V'lav Kal V'chomer. Here he says, wait a second, no, wait, it's a Kal V'chomer. Uma get the ite bal korcha, yomer betzad beitav v'sad chatzira in ilala, matana diminate lo kol sheken, right? If you need somebody there to force them to take something that they can willingly take, wouldn't all the more so they need to actually be physically present there, right?
Wait, I just want to take a step back for a second, if I may.
Of course, yeah.
When we just said that get is shani because it's balkarche, I think what we're saying is, I think the havamina here is that it's not like a matana.
Mhm.
In other words, it's not a matana, which you can't give somebody a present if he doesn't want it,
Yeah.
But get you can. So therefore, we're trying to learn it in by matana. You can't learn it from get.
Mhm. So, I mean, anybody who's ever gotten married, or had any sort of simcha knows that you can get a present against your will, apparently, but not. Sorry, it's yeah, no, I think exactly that, right? It's not a matana, so it follows under a different set of laws. But here we're saying actually, and I want to look at the Rashi here, the lo kol sheken, that will tie this all together. Everyone look at the lo kol sheken, the Rashi. Dechi amra ba'ina, right? Tricha. When you say matana, that's where I wanted. Is that what I wanted? Yeah. The leta bal korcha, the iamra lo ba'ina lo kanya, right? So if it's not against her will, so if she says I don't want it, it's not a kinyan. Lo kol sheken dechi amra ba'ina tzrichat shetiheh betzad chatzira. That if therefore since you can agree to it or cannot agree to it, you actually have to be physically present to agree to it or not agree to it, right? This is the whole point Rashi makes, is if bal korcha you have to be there, all the more so to make a choice about something, you actually have to be there, right? I think he's just operating a different logical structure than Rav Papa was, but it's one says bal korcha you have to be there because it's bal korcha, and the other one's like, no, if you have to be there bal korcha, then all the more so you have to be there in reshut, in a case where it's you have a choice, right? I want to make sure that I made that clear because it's a very hard. Maybe I'll say it. Should I say it one more time? Is that yeah, right? The first answer is, we say, well, wait a second. That get is different because it's against the person's will, and therefore, in other words, to give something against someone's will, they have to be there. But the response to that is no. If you have to be there to be something, to give something against someone's will, for someone to receive something against their will, for someone to receive something by their choice, all the more so they have to be there because they have to make the choice. So if they're not there, they haven't made the choice, right? If I just throw something in their chatzer and I can take it or not take it, well, if I'm not there, then nothing's happened because I haven't made a choice. And so this sounds like get should be a good, the fact that even against their will, you have to be there for it makes it sound like actually this is a good challenge. But we're going to get Rav Ashi, who's going to help out here. Ela Mar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says the following: Chatzer it Rabbi mishum yad. We said that someone's chatzer is an extension of their hand, let's call it that, or is included because of their hand, right? Your hand can purchase something, therefore your chatzer can purchase something. V'lo gara mishlichut, right? But it can be no worse than shlichut, right? Remember we said it's either yad or shlichut. So when your hand is able to acquire something, it can't be less effective than shlichut. All right. So even though it follows the rules of yad, it has to include the good of shlichut, right? So gabe get dehov hula, ein chavim ledam elav befanav, right? And what's the rule? And generally for shlichut, if I do shlichut for something and it's bad for them, unless I get their permission, unless I'm in front of them, I can't do the shlichut, right? Because we don't make a person lose. Here, chavin, I think actually is best translated as mafsid. Instead of obligate, we saw that earlier in our chapter, right? You can't make somebody lose out when they're not there to give permission for something, right? As to their shaliach, right? But gabe matana zechutulo, but a matana is good for you, except for some things you get for your wedding. Zachin leadam shel b'fanav. There you can do, if Rav Lexi says to me, I really want to give Sarah this amazing Gemara that I bought, and I'm like, oh, I'll be Sarah's shaliach. I know Sarah will love the Gemara, right? That's great. It's but we see a get as something that is for the woman, right? She no longer has a support structure because of the get. She may not want that. in the economic world they live in. And so therefore that's a chov for her, and therefore we're not allowed to do that without her present. So the whole thing with get is only about the fact that it's a chov, and not about the fact about whether or not she needs to be someone needs to be next to Chaser to receive something from somebody else. So okay, that closes the loop. We have Rav Papa, we have the opinion of Surah. Rav Papa's answer is, though, mainly is that matana is different, right? And it works so far. Okay, we are 18 minutes away from finishing the semester, so I want to maybe I know Rav Nachum. If Rav Nachum has something to say, then I want to hear it. So it's
I just had a question, of course, just ma pitom that it has to be not garua mishlichut.
I know, yeah, it's an interesting
Maybe
concept.
it's just learned from Yad and Zauza. Like, or why should it have to be? This is a strange idea that it has to have both aspects of it.
Well, in general, shlichut can't do, like, a shaliach cannot do more than you can,
Mhm.
right? If something is your yad, if we treat it like yad, mishum yad itrabe, then yeah, it's not garua. Like, there's nothing a shaliach can do for you that you are not able to.
Yeah. So
So yeah, it is not garua mishlichut. If something is functioning like your hand, it is minimally not going to act like less expansively than shlichut.
Yeah,
but
I
okay,
go ahead.
don't quite understand, but okay.
Yeah, I had two takes on this, right? One is this idea that the shaliach can't your yad has to be more powerful than your hand, right? It's than your shaliach. Sorry, your yad has to be more powerful than your shaliach. The other version, I think, is that at the end of the day, we actually that a chatzer has both the aspects of yad and shlichut, right? And therefore we can't make it any worse than shlichut. In other words, it has to follow the laws of both to some extent. And I think that might be a little bit where they're going with this, is that it's both. Chatzer is kind of a combination of yad and shlichut, and therefore, just like shlichut, it can't be chav for somebody when they're not there. So, or maybe put differently, when you're not there, let me actually do it this way. When you're not there, your chatzer acts as a shaliach. When you are there, it acts as a yad. And therefore, so when you're not there, it can't do something bad for you. When you are there, it can. I think yeah, that feels like a good answer. So, okay, I want to get to the gufa here. Chaval alano azman, unfortunately. So, this is my excuse. But gufa, let's do. Sarah, you want to read the gufa?
Sure. Sorry, I lost my place. So
We're in the fourth line down on Yud Bet Amud
yeah,
Aleph.
Kufa. Ra'autan ratzina achar hametzia v'chulei. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, v'husher ratz acharehan magian. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, b'matana hayach kibla mine. Rabbi Abba Bar. Do you want to stop there?
No, keep going. Yeah.
Okay. Kibla mine Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. Afal pisha ratz acharehen v'ein magian.
Good.
Okay, cool. So now we're gonna go back to like the original. We've dealt with Rav Papa. We're now going to back to our old friend, the old question.
Mhm.
And then okay, so we're talking about our Mishnah. These people are running after the Metzia. I'll just leave that untranslated for now.
Good.
We don't have to decide too much about what it actually means. Okay, so Rabbi Yirmiyah says that Rabbi Yochanan says, we're talking about a case where he would be able to run after them and actually catch them.
Mm-hmm.
And then Rabbi Yirmiyah was like, okay, but then how does that work for a batana? And then Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana says that's in a case in which you run after them, but you wouldn't actually get to them.
Yeah, even for matana, you don't have to be able to get them, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to ask a question about that case, extending from that case. So here we go.
Okay, so by Rava, Zarak Arniki bepetach zeh, v'yatza bepetach acher, ma. Okay, so I'm throwing like wallet or a purse or something through one like doorway, and it goes out the other doorway.
Mhm.
Now,
Good. Now,
Avir,
I want to pause you for 1 second here. What's the case here? What's the status of this wallet when I've thrown it? I think this is an interesting question. I'm not the only one who thinks this is an interesting question. Rashi,
what's the
Tosfos-
status of the wallet in terms of like who owns it?
Yes.
Right. So you might think, I mean, I guess it depends on whether you think that the heir is connected.
Oh, I think even before, forget that. Like the moment as it leaves my hand, right? What's the status of the wall? Or let me ask this, I'll ask it a different way. What is Rava asking about? The Resha or the Seifa? Right? Is he asking a question about the Metzia part of the Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yirmiyah in the Rabbi Yochanan, or is he asking about the Seifa where Rabbi Yirmiyah says, what about a matana?
Oh, I thought he was talking about the Resha, but now that you say that.
Rashi also thinks that he's talking about the Resha, right? Rashi says, where was it? Read the Rashi, Zarak Arnaki.
Zarak Arnaki, Vefkira Lechol Hakodim.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I threw it and like whoever gets to it gets to it.
Exactly, it's mafkir. But if you look at the beginning of, I'll read it, at the beginning of the Tosfot, v'yatzab b'petach acher, right? Look at that. Lo garsina v'afkire, dehachashiv leidat acheret makne oto, right? This is, we don't have the words in there, the afkire, and he's mafkiret, right? Because we're considering a case where dat acheret is makne. It's a gift, right? So it's really a question is, what is Rava asking about? Is he asking about the Resha? And Tosfos has more proof because they're going to bring the proof from Matana here. So it sounds like it is a Matana case. So in other words, is Rava's question that, okay, we agree that you have to be able to catch something in a case of Metzia. What if it's thrown in the air and never lands in your property? Or does he say, we agree that you don't have to be able to catch something in a Matana case, but if it's thrown in your airspace, you're like, what's the case then? And it's never going to land. So I think it's just that they're pointing out a really interesting kind of ambiguity in the Gemara of what is Rava asking about. So,
yeah,
which makes the Rashi actually make a lot more sense to me. Of like, oh yeah, it makes sense. He might be asking about the Resha. So, okay, but I took us down that road for a minute. I'm just opening these questions for us to answer over the summer. So okay. So the question is, mahu. All right. So keep going. Avir.
Avir she'in sofo la'anuach k'manuach damei olo. So is if there's an item that's going through airspace, but it's never actually going to stop and hit the ground in that airspace, or that court, like that domain, then is it as if it did? So the airspace is connected or not?
Good.
That's our question.
Yeah. So keep reading. Well, let's go through the Gemara here. So.
Okay. Amar le Rav Papa le Rava, v'amri la Rav Ada bar Matana le Rava. I think it's so funny that his name is Rav Ada bar Matana.
I know, I do too. It's
okay. V'amri le Ravina le Rava, love Ainu Madnitin. So he's gonna say, no, it's like a Mishnah. Ra'autan ratzinach ar hamitzia. V'amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, amar Rabbi Yochanan. Hu sherat acharehen umagian. So
we'll keep going. It's because
sorry. Babi Rabbi Yirmiyah b'matana hayach. So how does this apply to a matana? Because we're now in the world where for Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yochanan, we're talking about a case where you run after them and you actually get to them. And then the question is, well, then how does that apply to a matana? Viki blamine, Rabbi Abba bar Kahana b'matana afal pisharat acharehem ve'en magian. So for a matana, you don't have to actually be able to get there.
Good. How does this prove, without looking at the Rashi for the moment, how does the fact that you don't have to be able to catch a matana prove that if it's in your airspace that it doesn't even say officially, like whether or not that you are acquiring something?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? I
Yeah.
just didn't.
Somehow they're making a connection between if a matana goes flying across your field, maybe not flying, goes across your field, even if you don't have to catch it, right? You own it. To proving something about if something now doesn't touch your field but goes across the airspace, whether or not you own that thing.
Because it's never gonna, in both cases, it's not necessarily gonna stop in your space.
Beautiful. Read the Rashi ve'eno magian.
ואינו מגיען, עלמא מתגלגלים ויוצאין הן, ואין סופו להנוח, וכאמר דקנא ליה שדהו. So, right. It's like going along.
Mhm.
And it could go out, it could like basically go through your field and not stop.
Or it could be
It
that the
never-
Gemara, not like Rashi, thinks that you mamish threw it through the air, that's the case. The Gemara is thinking that that's the case. You threw the matana through the airspace, and even in such a case, it would require us.
Exactly. Right. Because, touching your field, doesn't, if it keeps going, even though it touches the field, maybe that's the same thing as not even touching the field, right? We actually play this out as to take a side, thing to Hilchot Shabbat, right? Hotzah, right? This comes up, right? A question of if I am always moving through Reshut HaRabim and I never stop, right? Do I have hanacha? Right. And this is actually, is a way that potentially if I end up stuck in a case where like, oh my gosh, I'm carrying something in Reshut HaRabim, like maybe if I keep moving all the time, I'll never at least deoraita violate anything. Right. It's you see this. And so, like people will keep spinning around. Rev Lexi, did you have something you wanted to, oh, sorry, you looked for a minute like that you had an addition to it. I don't know if people have ever seen this solution, right? There's all sorts of interesting solutions and for next year. This is a good preview for Hilchot Shabbat, right? For like, what happens if you get stuck as Shabbat comes in Reshut HaRabim, and you have a bunch of stuff on you, or you accidentally just find you were carrying something, you didn't realize it, on Shabbat, like, what do you do? These are solutions to stop you from violating Deoraita, potentially. Same thing here, not the same thing, if not violating Deoraita, that as long as something is moving, it's as if it were in the air. Right, it might as well, and in which case, then it's as if, and if that acquires, that must mean that the airspace that just being over the field acquires in general. I'm trying to think time. Yeah, let's do the end of the Gemara, and then I might go back to this Rashi here, and then we'll probably end. So because we're going to answer that's not the case. Well, Amarle. It's the second, in middle of the second line up from the Mishnah.
Okay, Amarle, mitzgagel ka'amarta, shane, mitzgagel k'demunach dame. So, well, if it's like rolling along, that's different because that's as if then it really does kind of touch down. That's
exactly.
Really.
But, all right. So with that, actually, I want to read the Rambam. That's what I decided at the last minute here. Why not end with the Rambam? 2 minutes. I'll read. I'll share my screen. Let's make this a little bit bigger. But this will be the Rambam kind of. All right. This is in Hilchot Zechiyah Matana, Perik Daled. We'll start with Halacha Chet. He says, Zachin lekatan afilu ben yom echad, ulgadol ben befanav ben shelo befanav. Right? You can transfer something to even a child and to an adult, whether or not they're there. Right? His chatzer acquires for him even without his knowledge. This is Rabbi Yosef. Even if he's not there. Right? That once it gets to your chatzer, as if the person transferred it to you. Right? We're talking about a matana case. Okay? This seems to be the way we've played out. So matana shane. Right? But medivrim amarim, bechatzer mishtameret. He says that only works in a guarded chatzer. Aval bechatzer she'ena mishtameret, kigon sadehu v'chorvato, ad she'omed betzida v'yomar zachtali sadi. Right? But if it's not mishtameret, right, you have to be there. This actually doesn't seem to fit with what we've been saying. Maybe, right? וכן 400 של אדם שהוא עומד בצידן, קונים לו בצמתה או בצידי רשות הרבים. We saw this, that your 400 in the alleyway or at the side of רשות הרבים, או בחצר שאין לו בעלים, or in a, a hefker חצר, that acquires for you, this previous sugyot we've done. אבל ברשות הרבים, או בשדה חברו, רשות הרבים where everyone's like overlapping the 400, or in somebody else's שדה, אינו זוכה, עד שיגיע מתנה לידו, until it comes to your hand. V'ktana tiskela chatzira v'arba moshela. And a katana does have a chatzer, right? But katan eno zoche, right? But katan doesn't. Ad shetagia matana liado, or ad shiskelo acher, right? But for a katan, we saw this also. They need to actually have it come to their hand. And the Ravad comes in, right? And he says, right, Omer Avraham Ani Omer. Ein davar mechuvar b'matana il b'mitzia. He says, this doesn't make sense for matana. This was about mitzia, right? He says, wait a second, Rambam. No. To have to be on the tzad of your sadeh, that was for a mitzia. For matana, we said you don't have to be there, right? Dat acheret, right? So it's interesting what's going on in the Rambam here. And so I'll end, maybe this is the way I end. One of the ways that this is understood without getting into the Gra is that the Rambam is understanding that only works for a matana that is for like a tzfi shavur, right? It's like a very limited case where you can still catch it. But however, for the general case, matana is like a mitzia, and therefore you actually have to be in the tzad sadeh. Not everyone agrees with the Rambam. It becomes a big machloket. And with there, we shall end the year. Maybe there are final questions, final thoughts. I thought it was a nice way to wrap up some of the concepts we've seen. Yesher koach, everybody. This was good.
Koyach. Very good.
Yeah.
It's always good to end with the teruts for the Rambam.
Exactly. So, and the Ravad yelling at him. So,
Although granted, the Gra doesn't think the Rambam's right,
no,
if that's true. So
yeah.
Yeah, where is your what is your that's your own answer, or that's you saw that?
I saw it in the Gra. That's where I got this whole thing. So, yeah. But the Gra is he essentially is the question of the Rambam is curious as to whether or not the question is on the Mishnah or on the Rabbi Yirmiyah or Rabbi Yochanan. Essentially, is how he distinguishes it. But yeah. With that, we shall close, and next year Hilchos Shabbos.
Next year Hilchos Shabbos, September 1st. We'll see you there.
So
we'll communicate before then. Don't worry. I won't just send you a letter 5 minutes before Shir on September 1st. At least I hope not.
You're in 30 minutes. Surprise.
Yeah. September 1st is a Sunday anyway, so you definitely won't send this.
Sorry, it's Monday. Yes, so September 2nd. Yeah, thank you very much, Joel. Well, it's been a pleasure to learn with all of you this year for me. Certainly something different than what we usually do, the halacha, and it's good. It's definitely good. I enjoyed it. But I'll also enjoy going back to halacha. Easier Gemaras in halacha in general. In general.
Yes.
Because they're Gemaras, in general. We'll see. All right. Anyway, Shavua Tov and Shekayach to everybody for the year.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.